Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders here, looking ahead to the trade deadline. The trade deadline for the Islanders will be a success if the team can get rid of some of the veterans who have some dead weight right now on this team, create a little more salary cap room, and possibly bring in some prospects or draft choices. One thing about the Islanders, they are the oldest team as far as average age on their roster is concerned in the National Hockey League. So to get some more prospects and some more younger players would certainly be of benefit. The other thing is this. The Islanders' two major goals have to be to get a puck-moving defenseman and a sniper. That's probably not going to take place at the trade deadline. But what you need to do is free up enough roster space and cap space in whatever deals that Lou Lamoriello can make in order to make it possible to make those two acquisitions during the offseason. Right now, the Islanders have $15 million worth of cap space available. If they can get that number up to maybe 20 or 25 million, that would put them in an outstanding position to really make some moves during the offseason. And that is the major goal for the Islanders at the trade deadline. For more, listen to the Locked On Islanders podcast with me, Gil Martin, wherever you get podcasts.
Hi there, everyone. This is Laura Saba and Scott Metla of Locked On Canadiens. Scott, as we look ahead to the trade deadline, what do you think the trade deadline will be a success for the Canadiens? Like, what needs to happen for the trade deadline to be successful for this Montreal Canadiens team?
I think the biggest thing for both Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon going into this deadline is accumulating more picks and prospects to continue to fuel this kind of rebuild here, because they want to make a big splash in free agency like we talked about on a previous show. And to do that, you need cap space. And the best way to get cap space and remain good is acquiring young, cheap talent, something that Marc Bergevin kind of did, but not really, because he would acquire said cheap talent and then pay it long term. I think if they can acquire some of these younger guys, you know, a Vitaly Kravtsov and the like, they can kind of get the rebuild flying here and then make a big splash in general free agency. And I think just cleaning out some of the, I don't want to call it dead weight from the Marc Bergevin era, but there is definitely a lot they can do to clear up cap space so they can proceed into the future with the vision of the new group here. It's going to be really interesting because there's a lot that could or could not happen. We know Ben Sherratt's likely gone, but is Arturi Lehkonen staying? Is Jeff Petrie staying? Are they going? We don't quite know yet, so it's going to be a real busy trade deadline in Montreal.
The trade deadline is quickly approaching for the NHL and your Detroit Red Wings. It's time to start talking about what a successful trade deadline might look like for Detroit. I think the Wings are in an interesting position because they have a very young core that's young and controllable under contract. And they don't have too many veterans on expiring deals that have a lot of value at this deadline. I think some of the only players you're going to look at to get traded are Nick Leddy and Vlad Nemestikov. And what would a successful trade deadline look like? I think that it's probably just moving Vlad and Leddy and probably getting either relatively decent draft picks or some prospects that you're kind of excited about. I don't expect either of those guys to garner, you know, first, even second round pick returns or top prospects in an organization back for you. But I think we're also past the point in the rebuild where we're just selling dudes off for sixth, fifth, sixth, seventh round picks. So I think you're looking at a return of mid draft picks or decently rated prospects, and that's probably it. There's not too much else to do for the Wings. They're a young team building forward, and they have the rest of their guys they want under control. So I think that's probably what a successful trade deadline looks like for your Detroit Red Wings.
Hello, everyone. It's Jess Belmosto from Locked On Calgary Flames. The trade deadline will be a success for the Flames if they do not go out and overpay for another defenseman. They are already overpaying Eric Goodbranson and Nikita Zadorov, who, you know, have helped this team. But if you're looking to go all in and buy for, you know, be a buyer for the Stanley Cup playoffs, you have to look at things realistically. Are we paying for a rental, or is this going to be a little bit of a longer term deal, kind of like the Tyler Toffoli situation? And of course, you have to look at things logistically, because you do have to re-sign Johnny, and you have to re-sign Matthew Tkachuk and Andrew Mangiapane, and look at things from that balcony view. Look at the logistics. And I think the worst thing the Flames could do right now is overpay for a defenseman like Ben Sherratt. It's not a good look. It would be bad. There would be articles written about it in 2 years saying this is where the Flames went wrong, and all the repercussions that have happened since then. So as long as the Flames don't overpay for the defenseman they need, it'll be a success. I think it's that simple.
How's it going, everybody? Chris and Kyle from Locked On Avalanche here, and it is coming up on trade season, and the Colorado Avalanche likely buyers being in the position that they are in. So what would make this a successful trade deadline season for the Avs?
I would say veteran talent that you can insert on that third line, somebody that can help the Avalanche get past that roadblock that they keep hitting, the second round.
Yeah, you're hearing the name Claude Giroux get thrown around quite a bit. You would have to think the Avs are in on him. And this is kind of out of the realm of what the Avalanche have done the past few years. They've been buyers, but they don't make a big headline grabbing move. And when you know the position that they're in right now, kind of at the top of the standings in the league, and hearing the things that Joe Sakic has been saying, you kind of get the impression that he's going to take a different approach this year. And he thinks he has to kind of make that splash because of what Kyle was saying. They got to get out of the second round. This is a cup or bust season. And if they don't make any moves, not saying they can't make it, but they can shore up some holes that they have by getting a big name player and a couple of depth moves as well.
What's up, everyone? This is Jack Bushman from Locked On Blackhawks. The NHL trade deadline is right around the corner, and I want to talk about what would make this a successful deadline for the Chicago Blackhawks. I think this would be considered a success if the Blackhawks are able to move all of their expiring contracts and net as many draft picks, as much draft capital, and future prospects as possible. With guys like Marc-Andre Fleury, Calvin DeHaan, Ryan Carpenter even could be a cheap fourth liner that another team could be interested in. The Blackhawks, with them heading into a rebuild, there's no reason for these players to be part of the future, and the Blackhawks need to get as much as they can for those three. First round pick is probably only in play for Marc-Andre Fleury unless the Blackhawks are able to put together an enticing enough package. But even if they're not able to get a first round pick, they just got to be thinking about the future as much as possible. Get as many high round picks, even if they're getting offers for second or third round picks for guys like Dominic Kubalik, Dylan Strome, even Henrik Borgstrom, who hasn't fit well here in Chicago. I think they have to seize the moment and take that, because by entering this rebuild, we're thinking 3 to 5 years down the road now, and there's some debate whether or not Strome or Kubalik will even be around at that point in the future. So whatever it may be, the Blackhawks just need to get as much draft capital as possible. They don't have a first round pick in this year's upcoming NHL draft, so that should be a goal of theirs. If not, though, they got to take on as much draft capital and young prospects that they find enticing as they can, because clearly what they have right now hasn't been working for them for quite some time. They don't have a deep prospect pool. They need to be thinking about the future, and I think this would be considered a success if the Blackhawks are able to move all of those expiring contracts and maybe even another piece or two that will help them start thinking about the future. For more coverage on the Chicago Blackhawks as we approach the trade deadline, be sure to check out Locked On Blackhawks, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, the trade deadline is right around the corner. Maybe my favorite part of the NHL regular season. It's so fun to just sit there refreshing Twitter, refreshing all the various socials, just seeing what happens, who goes where. And when you got a team with some stake in the game like the St. Louis Blues, it's going to be an exciting one. If you've been listening to our show at all this season, any episode, chances are you've heard us talk about the St. Louis Blues and our desire for them to add a defenseman to this roster. The Blues have had some immense troubles on defense this season. It's no secret. You know, we talked about it in yesterday's episode. when you're looking at plus minus, you got plus 36 for Justin Falk, plus 24 for Torrey Krug. Then the next best guy is Marco Scandella with a plus 3. So it is clear that there is a big gaping hole on the Blues defense, which needs to be filled hopefully at the trade deadline. There are a couple names out there that are pretty enticing. Jacob Chikrin, Ben Sherratt, which I'm kind of not too sold on Ben Sherratt, but hey, could be a fit. Hampus Lindholm, lots of different names out there, but defensemen are hard to come by, so it's going to be a competitive field. But like I said, I think if the Blues want to take it to the next level and contend come playoff time, I think another defenseman is really what they need in order to.
This is Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins, and the trade deadline for the Black and Gold will be a success if they add a couple key pieces to the lineup. There's been a hole at the second line center since David Krejci announced that he was heading home to play in his native Czech Republic. Eric Haula has done an admirable job between Taylor Hall and David Pastrnak, but I'd like to see an upgrade at that position. The Bruins could also use a scoring winger to play on the top line with Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron. Right now, they are putting Jake DeBrusk in that position. That's his off wing, and he has also made a public trade request, so I'm not sure he's a long-term fit at that position. Finally, the Bruins could also use some reinforcements on defense. There's been a lot of talk about adding a left-hand defenseman to partner with Charlie McAvoy. I think Matt Grzelcyk, Mike Riley, or Derek Forbort could potentially fill that role. I'm more concerned about the right side behind McAvoy and Brandon Carlo. I'd like to see someone brought in to play either behind those two or perhaps on the second pair, perhaps a guy like John Klingberg from the Dallas Stars. Catch all the latest on the Boston Bruins on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast.
Hello, this is Dan Homey from Locked On Capitals, and what would a successful trade deadline look for your Washington Capitals? Well, I guess I don't need to spell it out any more than help in net. The Washington Capitals are in desperate need of help in net. They've had inconsistent goaltending in the form of Vitek Vanacek and Ilya Samsonov the entire season. They've tried players and goaltenders from AHL Hershey with mixed results, most notably Zach Fucale, who I think may have a chance with the Washington Capitals. I think they should definitely give him a shot before the trade deadline. But it's not only goaltending. They need help on defense. As you know, you can be one of the greatest teams in the NHL, and if you have poor goaltending and poor defense, well, that's not going to work because those two work hand in hand. If you remember the last game against the Flyers, they scored within the first 11 seconds. And then you're coming back, you're trying to come back from a deficit from the very beginning, and that is not going to work with the Washington Capitals. So if I'm going to prioritize it, number one, they need help in net. Number two, they need help in defense. And then number three is a big one as well, is they could use help in depth scoring. They need that scoring touch out there that has been missing this season. So the biggest takeaway from this is goaltending. Marc-Andre Fleury, Braden Holtby, something like that. The Capitals are in desperate need.
The NHL trade deadline is fast approaching, and the Arizona Coyotes are going to be looking to sell. Hey, everybody, this is Carl Pavlock, co-host of Locked On Coyotes. The Arizona Coyotes are going to continue what they've been doing since the start of the last offseason, shipping out anyone they can to get any kind of return. That's going to mean moving big players like Phil Kessel, possibly a Shane Gostisbehere, maybe a Travis Boyd for an interesting team, and getting as many picks and prospects back as they can. They are looking to jumpstart this rebuild, and they do that through the draft. They already have 5 picks in the second round of next year's draft. That's not enough picks. They need more picks. They only have 3 first-round picks. How are you going to build a team with only 3 first-round picks? You just can't. So the Coyotes are going to be looking for more. And we're going to see that with just, like I said, anyone with a pulse getting shipped out for whatever they can get.
What's up? This is Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils, and here is my trade deadline video. So here's what a successful day at the office would look like for Tom Fitzgerald and the entire staff come the trade deadline. If one, the Devils are able to trade for a decent goalie, because the goaltending position has been, for a lack of better terms, very inconsistent. Nico Dawes is starting to break out just a little bit, but still, you don't really want to rely on him too heavily. And it's just been a tough position to fill for the Devils because Mackenzie Blackwood is out for an extended period of time. Jonathan Bernier is out for the rest of the year. So goaltending has been very inconsistent and it's costed us a lot of games. So ultimately, Tom Fitzgerald has put out a statement saying that the Devils are looking for possible goalies out there available in the market. So if they're able to trade for a decent goalie, I think that would be a successful day at the office. Or if they do very little, because here's the thing. I know this season has been a disappointing year for the Devils, but the fact of the matter is like just a lot of narratives just didn't go into our favor. So we still have Dougie Hamilton signed to long-term. We have Nico Hischier signed to long-term. We have Jack Hughes signed to long-term. Jesper Bratt is pretty much guaranteed to get an extension, whether that's 2, 3, whatever the case might be. Jesper Bratt will certainly be back with the organization more likely than not. And we also have Mackenzie Blackwood. He'll be returning next year, and hopefully his heel will be fully recovered. So the thing is that we have our roster, we have our pieces set for the future. So we don't really need to make any drastic moves to maybe move up in the upcoming amateur draft, because that's just not in our interest. We have like Alexander Holtz, we have Luke Hughes, we have Dawson Mercer, we have 2 former first overall picks. So I think we're pretty much past just tanking and trying to get a higher draft position. I think now it's just go out there and see what could potentially happen. So a successful day at the office for the New Jersey Devils come the trade deadline is if 1, they trade for a decent goalie, or 2, they do very little, so that way they don't completely shapeshift their roster, and that way they don't really mess up what they could potentially do next season, because I anticipate that next season will be a lot better for them in terms of performance, especially with the players that they have signed to long-term deals.
Hey there, hockey fans. Jared Ellis here, host of Locked On Hurricanes, and the trade deadline is right around the corner for the NHL. It'll be here before we know it. And the Carolina Hurricanes are a team that really doesn't need to do a whole lot of moves at the deadline. I personally could see them not making any moves at all because they are such a stacked team as is. However, they have been hampered with injuries on their blue line, and I think that could potentially make them a buyer at this trade deadline to look to make some improvements there, because the bottom end has been a bit shaky, as well as maybe making a move to add some depth scoring, so come playoff time the load doesn't fall entirely on guys like Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, and Teuvo Teravainen. But only time will tell to see what the Carolina Hurricanes decide to do, because I think this will be an interesting deadline. I could see them maybe doing something or doing nothing at all, but only time will tell now.
Sometimes the best course of action is actually to do no action. Jay Foster from Locked On Blue Jackets here, and kind of the best, we're looking at the trade deadline at the minute, and the best move, I think, for the Blue Jackets is to hang up the phone. Don't make any moves. The Blue Jackets are in a weird position at the minute. They're kind of in that, oh, will they, won't they make the playoffs? And I don't think it makes sense to sell a bunch of guys necessarily and give up on making the playoffs, but I also don't think the Blue Jackets should be buyers. I think if they make the playoffs with the roster that they've got right now, then that's great. If not, I don't think it makes sense to give up asset, picks, prospects to maybe make the playoffs and likely get thrown out in the first or maybe the second round. But I also don't know that it makes sense to sell. A lot of our big trade pieces are either injured or they come with term or might be a little too expensive, or they're just something that other teams aren't interested in. You know, the goalie market's kind of weird right now. Korpisalo is injured. He hasn't had a very good season. Max Domi is an option. For the right package, I could see them moving Patrick Laine, but I also think they want to keep Patrick Laine. So this is all stuff we're going to be talking about on Locked On Blue Jackets as the trade deadline approaches in the next couple of weeks. I've been Jay Foster. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcast.
This year, the Kings could be buyers at the trade deadline. They're sitting in a playoff spot for the first time in years, and they just might be able to hold on to it. I'm Sarah Avampato, host of Locked On Los Angeles Kings, and this year is full of possibility in terms of what the Kings could do at the trade deadline. A successful deadline, though, might mean doing absolutely nothing. While it's fun to imagine, this isn't the 2012 Kings, and they're not going to rise up from the number 8 seed to win the whole thing. They're not just one guy away from being a true Cup competitor, so any moves the Kings make would likely be for players who still have some term left. Any rentals should be inexpensive deals that don't really subtract much from the team overall. The Kings need to be looking towards the future in terms of being truly competitive, and that means acquiring players who still have some time left to stick around. Look at the trade for Victor Arvidsson in the offseason. A player who still has time left on his contract, he can be a bridge to the next generation of Kings. We know what the Kings are looking for help with: scoring wingers who actually have the ability to finish, puck-moving, creative defensemen, particularly one who can play on the left side. None of that is going to come cheap, though, so if the Kings can cut deal to fill those spots without giving away top prospects, great. We already know Quentin Byfield and Brant Clark are untouchable, but what does the team think about guys like Brock Faber, Jordan Spence, even Arthur Kaliev? How much do you want to give up to get a guy who can help you over the finish line a season or two from now? It's a tough call, and the right choice might be making no choice at all. If the price is too much, Rob Blake should just walk away, but it's a fine line to walk, making sure that he still knows that his team trusts him to make the right decisions. You can follow along with all of the latest Kings news as we get closer to the trade deadline by listening to Locked On Los Angeles Kings. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, Kraken faithful, Erica Lindsay Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, your only daily show for the Seattle Kraken. Trade deadline's coming up. If you've been listening to the show, you know that Ron Francis has been talking about it. Of course, everyone around the league is talking about it. But for months, we've been hearing that Mark Giordano is definitely on the trading block. Ron Francis says that Gio, as of at least earlier last week, is the only player that he has spoken to specifically about the trade deadline. To me, that indicates that Gio is definitely in play, and this is really more to do with contract size. So, what do the Seattle Kraken need, and what would a successful trade deadline look like for the Seattle Kraken? If we're being honest, probably freeing up some cap space and or getting some direct dollars. Any trade that they can make that's going to put more money in the bank so they can attack the offseason and free agency, I think is what this team needs. Why do I say that? Draft picks are good. There's obviously value in that, but we need to bridge the gap between the Seattle Kraken being good in the future and the Seattle Kraken getting more disciplined and more successful on the ice for next year. I don't think that happens. Of course, it doesn't happen with just draft picks or prospects. It has to happen with active players. So look for the Seattle Kraken to be able to do some of the things that they couldn't do in the expansion draft, and I think that all boils down to money.
Hey guys, I'm Mike DiStefano. Alongside me, I've got Dave Morasuti. We're the host of the Locked On Leafs podcast. The trade deadline just a few weeks away, and we're going through and talking about what we would consider to be a success for the Maple Leafs at this upcoming deadline. Dave, why don't you take the floor first? If this deadline were to be a success for the Toronto Maple Leafs, what happens?
Well, I think they have to address at least one of their bigger issues, whether it's finding a top 4 defenseman or it's improving the top 6. I think if you go into this deadline and you don't do any of that, it's a failure. So they have to address one of those key issues.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I think more so even the defense. I think they got to get themselves a legitimate top 4 defender to lock into that top 4. I mean, especially it compounds with the injury to Jake Muzzin. And the forward is more of a bit of a luxury, I think. If you can get a guy like JT Miller, I think you pull the trigger. But there's not too many big-time forwards out there that I'd be interested in if I'm Toronto over a top 4 defenseman.
Hi, this is Rachel Donner from the Locked On Flyers podcast. I'm here with Russ Cohen, and the Flyers have a very interesting trade deadline ahead. Definitely sellers in the grand scheme of things. But what would make this a successful trade deadline for the Flyers for you, Russ?
Well, a successful one would be getting a good roster player and a second for Risto, or at least a first and a second, getting third rounder, maybe a second or a conditional second for Justin Braun. You're just collecting on the other ones, Yandel, Thompson, whatever. 6s, 7s, they could be in 22, 3 or 4. That's fine. And I'm trying to think, is there anybody that I'm leaving out? Those are the main ones. Maybe if they wanted to do a high-powered trade, you put Travis Konechny in there, and you trade Konechny for, let's say, if it's Klingberg, if he's going to sign with you or something like that, then I would put Konechny in there. I did notice that the Dallas Stars have actually done a lot of scouting with the Flyers. So if it's not Klingberg, maybe you trade for someone like Denis Gurianov. It gets him off of their cap, and he could be a good goal scorer for you because he's still only 23. So something along those lines. And this way you get picks, you get some either very close prospects or guys that could play. They need to get a mix of all that.
Exactly. I think for me, the most important thing is to replenish the picks a little bit. We don't have a second rounder currently this year or next year. We want to get a first round pick in return for Giroux, of course, and then backfill a couple of roles that would be lost in some of these selling deals with either almost ready to go prospects or existing NHL players, some of whom you just mentioned, Russ. And then, I think you just want to optimize the return.
Yeah, just to say in the Giroux trade, the obvious one, because I didn't want to say every player. I do want a first, and I would like a roster player, a roster player, and some sort of prospect. I think that's what you're looking for in the Giroux trade.
So, yes, we're going to try and optimize the return for Giroux, for Rasmus Ristolainen, and potentially Justin Braun. We're going to test the market for Travis Konechny, like you said, and also maybe test the market for Martin Jones. And I think, if we put all of this together and get those picks and prospects and players, this could put the Flyers in an excellent position for next season.
Hello, friends. It is Harrison Lee from Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We are talking about how the Jets can be successful at the trade deadline. I think Winnipeg has a couple of main objectives. Obviously, this team is a seller first and foremost. The playoffs are definitely off the table. I think a lot more people are starting to become aware of that fact in the Jets themselves. I don't know if they know it yet, but I would imagine that the front office isn't naive. And so in that respect, they need to let some of the free agents who are not really going to be sticking around find success elsewhere. I'm looking at a couple of players that we'll actually talk about in a little bit, but these guys are going to be fetching some pretty good trade returns. I'd imagine Kopp, Stastny, and a few others could be on the move to some really successful teams. And if the Jets can restock the cupboard, get some draft picks, and maybe even a couple of prospects here and there, for me, I would find that to be pretty successful. Ultimately, the Jets have a couple of really big decisions to make, and the trade deadline will be the start of figuring out long-term which of the prospects are really going to be playing a major role with this team and which players might not be here after the season. So this is the biggest opportunity for guys like Heinola, Perfetti, and other young players to really step up. And honestly, I think it's a very exciting time, especially for the Jets, who might be looking for some real competition in these positions.
Hi guys, JD here from Locked On Sharks. With the Sharks re-signing Tomas Hertl, this really does not alter their trade deadline success too much, except for now it's going to be on a much smaller scale. They should still be listening to offers for Alexander Barabanov, Andrew Cogliano, Jake Middleton, James Reimer, any of these guys who could potentially help another team and help collect assets back for the Sharks. And also the Sharks should still be looking to be the third partner, since they do have a ton of cap space, to try to weaponize that cap space to help other teams make moves and gathering assets back. That gives them flexibility heading into the draft or into the offseason if they want to try to flip some of these assets to try to help the team make the playoffs next season. So we'll have a full breakdown of the Sharks trade deadline on Monday's trade deadline live show. So make sure you guys subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and of course check us out on YouTube as well.
Welcome inside a quick-hitting trade deadline special of Locked On Senators. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Brandon Piller, and unlike the teams of 4, 3, and even 2 years ago, now
the Ottawa Senators are just looking to move out some pending UFAs and get ready for the offseason.
Yeah, much more minor deals this time around, Ross. We're looking at guys like Tyler Ennis, Zach Sanford, Chris Tierney, Josh Brown, Anton Forsberg, players that really don't look into the Ottawa Senators' long-term plans, and it would be good for them to move those contracts out and get some picks or prospects in return.
There was one pending UFA you didn't mention there, and that's because Senators fans and management have been on record saying they would love to bring back Nick Paul. Reports are he turned down a 3-year, $6 million contract offer a couple of months ago, but you can bet that teams are calling on the versatile forward.
Yeah, he would make an amazing addition to a contending team's bottom six, but I hope the Senators re-sign him.
Time will tell, as you don't know if teams like going past the trade deadline with those pending UFAs. So lots of action here in the weeks leading up to March 21st. So stay locked on Senators. We're going to have it for you every day, Monday through Friday, free and available on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey everyone, Hunter Hodes here with the Locked On Penguins podcast, coming at you with another Locked On Now, as we're now 2 weeks away from the NHL trade deadline. Penguins, they don't really have a lot of needs going into it. They don't really need a backup goaltender because Casey DeSmith has rebounded. They don't really need any depth on defense. They've been mostly really good this year, but I really think this team could use another top 9 forward. Kasperi Kapanen has not gotten it done on Evgeny Malkin's right wing. Danton Heinen, he's been decent on the left side. He's been scoring a little bit more. That's okay. But if they can get another competent winger to play on Evgeny Malkin's line so that they can stop cycling wingers from inside the organization, I think that would go a long way to making this team that much more deeper and that much more of a contender going into the playoffs, as the Penguins are currently tied for second with the New York Rangers in the Metropolitan Division. For more on the Pittsburgh Penguins, you can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, the show's Twitter at @LO_Penguins, and you can find the Locked On Penguins podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Are the Predators buyers or are the Predators sellers? We still have no idea, and that's what makes this NHL trade line so tricky for Nashville Predators general manager David Poile. Hey everybody, Nick Morgan here from Locked On Predators. Yeah, the Preds are still a big question mark, and a lot of it hinges on whether or not Philip Forsberg is going to be on the roster past the deadline. Now, if they keep him, if they load him up regardless of his contract status and try to go one more year, then the Predators absolutely need to go for it. They can't have just one toe in the water like they have in previous years. They need to swing for the fences and get a couple of big pieces at the deadline, even if it's not, a marquee name. Hey, if Phil Kessel, he's somebody out there who is on an expiring contract, but has a lot of playoff experience and would be a handsome addition to any NHL roster hoping to make a postseason run. That being said, on the other side, if the Predators don't feel like they can get Philip Forsberg to re-sign and they're not confident on where they are in the standings, then I think you might see the Predators better off maybe selling some people at the deadline. If they really don't think they can win it, you have to get something for Philip Forsberg. And that's tricky because that can lose the entire locker room, trading one of your assets right ahead of a Stanley Cup playoff race. But it's something that would absolutely help jumpstart the Predators, maybe get some fresh blood on the roster. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. If you've covered David Poile enough, you know he is somebody who really has faith in his team. He doesn't like throwing in the towel at any point in the season. In fact, even those early years, you can count maybe 2-3 years in the entire Nashville Predators existence where they've really gone into fire sale mode. And I don't think David Poile is going to do that with this team. So I think you're going to see the Predators at least try to bring in a few more pieces and try to get the Preds to contender status this season. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. The Nashville Predators are certainly front and center for a lot of teams this year. So we'll have to see.
Hey, what is going on, hockey fans? It's John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers here to talk about what would make this a successful trade deadline for the Blue Shirts. And I think if you're a Ranger fan, you just got to take a second here to basically just enjoy and celebrate the fact that this team is going to be, it looks like, buyers for the first time in about half a decade here. So that's awesome in and of itself. But as far as what would make this a successful trade deadline season for the Rangers, I think if you're the Blue Shirts, you should be looking to add some secondary scoring, maybe like a a middle six, kind of a forward, somebody that can contribute, but you wouldn't necessarily have to break the bank in order to bring them in. Somebody like maybe JT Miller. Now, Miller, there's rightfully going to be a high asking price for him. He's having a tremendous season for the Vancouver Canucks, but it's great that he can play all three forward positions. Somebody that could add a little bit of scoring depth to the Rangers, and obviously he's very, very familiar with the Rangers and his surroundings. Tomas Hertl is somebody that I really like as well, but obviously I think the asking price is going to be very high with him too. As far as, maybe some less expensive rental type players, you could be looking at somebody like maybe a Riley Smith or a Phil Kessel. Again, guys you wouldn't necessarily have to break the bank to bring in, but guys that would immediately give you more depth, give you some secondary scoring, and ultimately make you a better team. So I think that that's pretty much the long and short of it. I've seen some Ranger fans talk about wanting a defenseman, but I don't think that's really all that necessary. When you look at the fact that the Rangers have a defensive core that includes Adam Fox, Ryan Lindgren, Jacob Trouba, Keandre Miller, and now Braden Schneider, it doesn't seem like it's really that huge of a need. I'd be open to the idea, but to me, you need middle six forwards and secondary scoring, at least one or two of those. And that's pretty much it. Make sure you check out the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
Jody Biasi from the Locked On Sabres podcast. The trade deadline is a-coming. Nothing too spectacular to expect from the Buffalo Sabres. It should be pretty non-eventful, but a couple of things that I think they should be looking to accomplish at the 2022 deadline coming up in a couple of weeks. Don't rock the boat. You're doing good. You're bottom in the standings, but we all expected that. You were hoping for some development from some certain individuals this season that could make you feel hopeful about the future. They have gotten that from players like Tage Thompson, Peyton Krebs, Jeff Skinner, to say the least, and Rasmus Dahlin. But what are you going to do with the deadline? Sell off your UFAs, whether that is Colin Miller, whether that is Robert Hagg, Craig Anderson, someone want to give you anything for Cody Eakin. Just get whatever you can for the guys that are not going to be a part of this future, that you know are not going to be a part of this future, and don't really rock the boat. I wouldn't expect the Sabres to do that anyhow. I don't think Kevin Adams is looking to make a splash deal. I think they're on the right track for what the expectations were this season, and I would expect that they are not going to do anything major at the deadline, but don't screw it up. There's no reason to have Colin Miller on the roster at the beginning of the month of April. If no one wants to give you a first-round pick, sell him for a second. Just at least you get something for these guys. The one player that I would like to see them hang on to that is a UFA is Mark Pysyk. I'd like to see him be re-signed and be a part of this future, but not going to lose sleep if they end up selling him at the deadline for a third or a fourth round pick. So that is what the Sabres should be expecting, and I think I would expect from the Sabres this coming trade deadline.
Howdy there, hockey fans. Dane Lewis here with the Locked On Stars podcast, here to give you a little bit of insight of how the Dallas Stars should be approaching the NHL trade deadline on March 21st. This will be a successful trade deadline for the Dallas Stars if they can find ways to not be big sellers. Emphasis on the word big. I'm okay with them maybe making one or two small moves, maybe sending mainly one guy off into a different organization for a decent return. I think that this Stars team is in a pretty good place right now, and they don't really have too much flexibility with their cap room to go out and sign a big name. So likely no Claude Giroux coming to Dallas, no JT Miller coming to Dallas, you name it. We're probably not going to get a big name free agent. As great as that would be, the Stars really just don't have the cap space and the money to do that. But also, they do have a good handful of players. And when they're at their best, they can be a really deadly unit in the NHL. The power play is a little bit cold right now, and the 5-on-5 offense is inconsistent as ever, as it typically is for the Dallas Stars. But they still have some really good pieces in Joe Pavelski, Roope Hintz, Jason Robertson. Tyler Seguin is having a nice second half of the season so far. Jake Ottinger has emerged as a fantastic goalie between the pipes for this Stars team. But really, there's one guy that I think the Stars could look to move potentially, and that is, of course, defenseman John Klingberg, who we know will likely be gone by the end of the season if he is to stay with Dallas. And so,
if the Stars can get a decent return for John Klingberg, whether that's, maybe a first round draft pick or some promising prospects and some additional picks with those, I think that that's worth looking into. I think at most, that's all the Stars should look to do, unless something just crazy happens. But this Stars team is very much in the race for a wild card spot in the Western Conference. So there's really no need for them to go out and make all these dramatic and drastic moves at the deadline because they seem to be okay right now. If they could somehow add, a really nice player that's NHL ready, that would be really nice, but I think it's a little bit unrealistic. So this is best case scenario for the Dallas Stars in the trade deadline. If really they can keep their team intact, if they can stay healthy, and if they do trade away John Klingberg, if they can get a decent trade package in return. If you want more information on the Dallas Stars and all of their trade deadline endeavors, be sure to check out the Locked On Stars podcast hosted by yours truly every Monday through Friday.
Really hard to nitpick on the Florida Panthers with the type of season they've been having, leading the Atlantic Division for the majority of this season, but with a few hiccups here and there. This team still has quite a few flaws, and one of those flaws comes with their defensive pairing in the middle outside of the Uyghur and Ekblad pairing. And this trade line would be successful if the Florida Panthers do get a defenseman that could be on that second or even third pair. And a few names out there have been Jacob Chikrin, Ben Sherratt, Hampus Lindholm, Mark Giordano. Those are the ones that the Florida Panthers are looking to target. And also a winger that the Florida Panthers could use. And one of the players available for via trade could be Claude Giroux of the Philadelphia Flyers or Phil Kessel of the Arizona Coyotes. The Florida Panthers could use some experience of players who have had playoff experience and extended playoff experience too. So that would be a success if the Florida Panthers go after those type of.
Hey everybody, Seth Topol, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, taking a look at what a successful trade deadline for the Minnesota Wild would look like. If the Minnesota Wild build off of what they have currently done, which is to trade Nico Sturm for Tyson Jost, if they can get somebody to take on Jack McBain's rights for more than a second-round pick, if we get a second-round pick or a first-round pick, and a bidding war between the Montreal Canadiens and the Arizona Coyotes continues, that would lead to a situation where the Wild get more than they were initially looking for, which would be a huge haul for Bill Guerin and company. Also, if the Wilds do add anyone, it'll be a successful deadline if they can add some help on defense, a veteran that brings some size to help kind of with physicality for this group. And if the Wild can avoid any bidding wars for particular players, I think that will also lead to a successful deadline. Of course, we will have all of that and more as we gear up for the trade deadline on Monday. So in order to stay up to date with all things Minnesota Wild and all things trade deadline, make sure to follow Locked On Wild wherever you listen to podcasts.